So welcome everyone. Today's presentations are going to be in two parts. So the document you've got on your chair, that's yours to take away. I'm going to be talking about that in the second half of the presentation, okay? The first half, Ren is going to deliver a presentation. He's going to do a presentation that he did a while back when he was training to become a mental health nurse. So, you know, a while back. And we thought it'd be good to sort of revisit that presentation. And then on the back of that, so what has changed in relation to this new document? And the document will be yours to take away if you want it, in case you need to challenge any practice that you either experience yourself or see someone you care for. I'll do some introductions in a minute, but just to say the only real ground rule that we have, the only rule we have is respect. Okay, what do I mean by that? I mean that some people might need to get up and walk around. Some people might want to turn their chair to face the other way. Some people might go to the back of the room. There's all sorts of ways we might behave in this group in order to feel safe and comfortable. And that's all perfectly acceptable, and we need that to be respected by everybody. And I'm Linda Buchan, I'm one of the directors at Axia. So I'm going to hand over now to Ren to do the first part of the presentation, and then we'll see what the timing's like then as to whether we have a break. At break time, you can borrow books. If you've lost your autism alert card or never got one in the first place, or your dyspraxia or ADHD one, you can get those. And generally, if you want to mingle, mingle. If you want to go and hide somewhere, do that as well. Okay? Over to you, Ren.
Cool. So my name's Ren. I'm a mental health nurse. I work for Axia and have done for a few years, under a few different titles, roles. So I began working for Axia, I think it was in 2017. I began working with Cal, with Elliot and Reese, who is not here, as the Anime Amigos. Woo, I think it says on the back of my shirt. Yeah. So. You have that shirt. I'm wearing it. So much of what the Anime Amigos do and what I did at the time, still do, is focused on people's special interests. So looking at things like nerdy interests, which a lot of autistic people tend to enjoy, video games, anime, films, music, role-playing games, card games, all sorts of things. So I've been doing that for a long time at Axia, and then I began my nurse training. Don't ask me when that was, I can't quite remember. It's all a bit of a blur. And coming to the end of that, I found myself in the role where I now am, which is a diagnostician, in addition to the stuff I do alongside the Anime Amigos. So, as Linda said, this is a presentation that I'd done as part of my university studies. As a mental health nurse. So the original presentation is available on the Axia website. It involved a literature review, which at the time was contemporaneous, I think is the word, so like of that time. So things then were up to date. That was a good few years ago, so what I've done is, as opposed to having a strongly clinical mental health nursing focus, I'm just basically adding a lot of the context and my experiences as a diagnostician since then. So there will be some numbers, there will be some statistics, some of them more recent than others, not all of them perhaps truly reflective of autistic experiences, but I just want this to be a little bit more free-flowing, less kind of structured. So this is me. I hope I've just outlined everything about me there. That's a picture of me at a K-pop concert last year. I went to go and see the band twice. They're fantastic, highly recommend. This is coming from a lifelong metalhead. Yeah, I think I've said everything there. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, yeah, to begin the discussion then. So, basically, estimates of autistic populations vary. So in the general population, it's said to be roughly 1 in 100 people. I think the often quoted percentage is 1.1% of people in the general population. So that's taken from the National Autistic Society website. So I realised actually, before I launch into this, the content might be a little bit heavy at times. I'm going to be talking about acute mental health care environments, which is basically psych wards, so places where people find themselves when they are in a period of mental health crisis. So that could be if they maybe cannot keep themselves safe, or other people perhaps might come to harm. That's when people are admitted, usually under a section of the Mental Health Act, into an inpatient unit. Other people go in as voluntary inpatients, and in which case they're not subject to the Mental Health, the Mental Health Act. But I just want to talk about those environments really quite broadly as spaces for neurodivergent people, and what considerations there are from a professional standpoint, and also for the individual. So, starting off with the 1 in 100 people, 1% of people being autistic, then we look to a very recent, so it was the Northern Ireland census that found that 5% of school children, school-aged children rather, have a diagnosis. 7.3% males and 2.7% females, which is sadly a trend that has been repeated across autism research pretty much throughout history. We know that there's a massive bias towards males, boys, men, usually from white middle-class backgrounds. So why is it 1% in the general population and 5% in children? Okay, so we have to look at where our knowledge is now compared to where it was about autism. We know a lot more about autism now. We kind of know the signs, traits, what to look out for in a person who, may be experiencing difficulty, let's say in school, or let's say in mental health services. What things do we need to keep an eye out for? Another figure I found I haven't included here, I think it was something like 0.07 or 0.02% of over 50s have a diagnosis. I'm really just pulling that off the top of my head, so apologies if that's incorrect. So then a little bit about prevalence rates of mental health conditions. So 1 in 5 people, so 20% of people roughly, between the ages of 8 and 25 have a probable mental health disorder, which was a figure found last year. So of those people, it says there, so 6% of people of the general population access mental health services between 2021 and 2022. And of that 6%, 3% of those were admitted as inpatients. So another difficulty I encountered when doing the initial study was that there aren't specific numbers about autistic populations in mental health, acute mental health units. So that was a figure I think I had to look at, how many beds were available and how many beds were, and then kind of extrapolate information from there, which was quite difficult. But there's no clear-cut numbers as far as I could find. But even so, the ones that I did find were much higher prevalence rates, effectively, in mental health units of autistic people. So a more recent, 2019 rather, not more recent, but roughly 20% of autistic people will experience an anxiety disorder at some point in their life, 13% sleep disorders, 11% depressive disorders. So already the likelihood of encountering an autistic person in mental health services is significantly higher than it would be for a neurotypical person. These rates are not quite so high. I think another study, maybe around 2016, was estimating around 40% of people might meet the criteria for an anxiety disorder diagnosis if they're autistic. So, yeah, the chances of running into someone who's autistic within mental health services is pretty high already, whether or not they have a diagnosis. So it's important to know this information. It's important to be able to consider what factors might be at play when you're coming into when someone's coming into a mental health environment, what adaptations can be made. ADHD, another really commonly co-occurring condition alongside autism. We know that if you are neurodivergent in some way, the chances that you have a second condition are a lot higher. And this study estimates it to be about 50%, 50 to 70% co-occurring autism and ADHD. And ADHD is another massive population within mental health settings. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, I think I'd probably just outlined all of that, but often seeing people as a diagnostician, it might be the case that someone has gone to their GP and reached out about some mental health concerns that they may have. Maybe they're feeling very anxious, maybe they're low in mood, maybe something else is happening. It might be that that is looked into, and after perhaps medication, after therapy, something still hasn't changed, or maybe the diagnosis doesn't quite feel right. So looking into then what could be behind it. So first of all, coming to services, wanting support for mental health could lead to an autism diagnosis. So it might be that a person's first instance of first encounter with mental health services might be at that crisis point where everything's fallen apart and that person cannot care for themselves. Okay, well, you are now in services. If everyone's knowledge is good enough, we can pick up on something that may not have been considered previously. So it's always good to have more knowledge and understanding. So misdiagnosis, underdiagnosis, diagnostic overshadowing, I believe is the term. Basically, other conditions looking like autism or looking like, autism looking like anxiety, something like that, or obsessive compulsive disorder is a prime example of that. So people with OCD often have ritualistic, repetitive behaviours in the same, which is also a commonly understood feature of autism. But the mentality behind it is different. I'm not saying that these things can't co-occur, but it might be labelling something as OCD when actually there is something else going on. So a ritualistic, opening and closing a door in a certain way might be to avoid something catastrophic happening in your life, in which case that would be more of an OCD mentality. For an autistic person, doing something in exactly the same way each time is routine, it's predictable. You know that if you do this in the same way each time, you're going to have the same outcome, and therefore it is reliable. It can be calming. So what can be viewed as obsessional in a negative sense might actually be reassuring and comforting from an autistic standpoint. One I haven't mentioned on here is eating disorders. So thinking about sensory sensitivities within, for autistic people, within food specifically. You might have a very strong sensitivity to textures that are slimy or crunchy or inconsistent, in which case it might be very difficult to have a wide range of foods. So that could be seen as a limited diet, which is another very common feature of eating disorders. It could be that food is prepared in a different way each time, making it unpredictable and therefore stressful, distressing. With personality disorders also, that's a very common one, particularly for women. I think to an extent, mental health conditions can be a bit faddish. I think when there can be trends of professionals jumping on certain diagnoses and using it as a bit of an explanation for everything that they encounter, particularly if that person is difficult or they don't understand their needs. And that's one I see a lot of, unfortunately, is personality disorder. Said about that before, but whether or not you have a diagnosis in services or you do not have a diagnosis, it's equally important to understand the nuances of autistic thinking and experiences and make those spaces more accommodating. Realistically, that crisis position should be, if you're in that position, it should be minimally spent within services. That's the last point, really. Acute settings historically are traumatic for a lot of autistic people. You've got totally new environment, new people, new sensory experiences, people being in direct pressure of time on staff. It's very stressful. So I think the kind of real conclusion to this is don't really put people in these spaces if you can, unless it's absolutely necessary. So it's really just going to be a case of what can be done to make it more manageable. I had another point, but I've forgotten. Could I have the next slide, please? Yeah, so thinking first about sensory sensitivities. So a lot of autistic people, neurodivergent people experience differences with sensory perception. It's not limited to this list, but most commonly people think of the 5 senses, don't they? So I mean, I'll start with those, and of course other things hopefully will come out as well as I just kind of wax on. So thinking about sound first of all, brand new people around you, can you tolerate their tone of voice, their pitch, the sound, their volume levels? Coming into a hospital or any kind of healthcare environment is quite startling, really, with all of the beeps and the alarms and people rushing to and fro, and unfamiliar sounds can be very distressing. If you are in an acute mental health care environment, usually you have your own room, but that's not guaranteed. If you do, is it a guarantee that that's a quiet space for you? Are the walls soundproofed? If you are sharing with someone else, how is that managed? Do you have the capacity to wear ear defenders? Do you have them with you? If you do, can you tolerate wearing them? So obviously what works for one person will not necessarily be more broadly applicable. But yeah, obviously important to look at this. So thinking about light then, a lot of people tell me that they absolutely despise, and I'm with them on this, halogen strip lights because they're awful. Like bright white ones, the ones you'd have in like school.
Oh yeah, the ones that like collapse.
Yeah, and like in corridors and things in hospitals.
Oh, yeah, it does like a collapse.
They're horrendous. What if they're everywhere? What if they're flickering? What if so bright colours are put there, but what if the decor of the ward is like a really gaudy orange and you absolutely can't look at orange for whatever reason? It might be painful for you to look at or deeply uncomfortable. How can you manage it? Does that mean that you then can't access public spaces in the ward? I think that nurses and healthcare staff often have to do is carry out observations on service users. So maybe at night time, if a person needs to be observed every hour to make sure that they're safe, usually a staff member will shine a light through the window, which, as you might imagine, if you're very light sensitive, would be deeply, it's invasive anyway. But it's weighing what the kind of cost of this is. Is it important? Is it absolutely vital? I need to see this person, or is it more dysregulating and distressing for me to shine a light on them every hour? So it's weighing on an individual basis. In terms of smell, hospitals tend to be very clean environments. There are staff members around who will be washing and scrubbing things down and making them hygienic. Usually they're quite acute, and unpleasant smells might cause headaches, migraines. The smell of food might be overwhelming for you if someone's eating next to you if you're in a public area. If it's detergent, for example, used in washing clothes in hospital, it might be different than the one you're used to. And then your clothes smell entirely different, and can you manage that? Can you wear them? Other people, of course. I will be the first to accept that not all nurses smell the best, sadly, me included. And also it can be true of other people on the ward as well. So it's something to be mindful of. Touch sensitivity. I think most of us find great comfort in our own comfortable space in bed. We're used to our bedding and the sheets and the mattress and the feeling of the duvet on us, but suddenly all of that is very different. Often in hospital you need to have a mattress that is easily washable. So it might be a sort of plastic exterior with a sheet on top of that. Quite foamy, not particularly resistant. Can you even sleep on it? What if you're used to sleeping on the floor and it's not carpet, it's a wooden floor, as it often is? Is it possible to use the bedding to create that sleeping space for yourself? Again, can you even manage the feeling of the fabric on your skin? So also, the people who know you well hopefully will be able to support with this. Bringing in certain comfort items such as blankets or cuddly toys, for example, fidgets, providing a way to have some sense of predictability that you would have at home as you do in this very different environment. But if again, very quickly finding yourself in that situation, you wouldn't necessarily have the time to prepare for that ahead of time. So what can the staff do to assist? hopefully speak to you directly and ascertain whether things are an issue for you or what you find helpful or beneficial. But that isn't always possible. So in terms of temperature, very weirdly, the last hospital I was in had underfloor heating, which I thought was the devil. I hated it. If you've got like a warm floor or even a warm environment, the windows can only open a certain degree, some of them, for understandable reasons. If you can't really manage with the heat, then is it possible to dispel some of the heat so that you can have a cool environment? Not necessarily. With the food being different as well, it might be that you have a safe food at home that you have you are readily able to access. Again, not always possible in hospital. It might be also that the same food is available to you but prepared in a very different way. The consistency might be different. Maybe the sauce is too watery or it tastes different. Is it still edible? And as well with pain, is everyone's concept of pain the same? Some people may feel it more extremely or less so than others. Nurses or the healthcare staff might ask you to rate pain on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the worst you've ever experienced. Not in all situations does anyone go to a 10, but everyone's scale is very, very different.
I ask me that half the time, and I always say I don't remember what the worst pain I ever felt was, so I can't give you a scale.
Well, it's probably for the best then. But yeah, so one I've not really listed, but internal sensations as well. Are you able to tell if you're hungry or if you're thirsty or if you need the toilet? What you may be feeling emotion-wise. Communicating that to a nurse then becomes very, very difficult. People have different... actually, sorry, if you could go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So coming on to communicating what you're experiencing and interacting with others. So talking about feelings, I'm going to jump down to the fourth point there. More abstract concepts we know can be challenging for some autistic people. Part of it, I think, is maybe people having different definitions for the same word. And I think back to someone in an assessment once told me that something mithered them. And to me, mithered meant like, oh, I'm a little bit bothered, it's not slightly irritating. But to them, it was like, no, actually, that really flustered me. I was really upset by that. So two people having a very different definition for the same word causes a barrier to that. It might be difficult to determine, am I feeling anxious? My heart's beating faster. My stomach doesn't feel very good, perhaps. Is that anxiety? Or is that something else? So sometimes the kind of sensory experience of what your body is doing makes it, makes expressing that difficult. So information delivery. Can you guarantee that when you are imparting information to another person, it is done in their preferred medium? If they're dyslexic, if they've got Erland syndrome, or other neurodevelopmental differences might make reading more difficult. Giving that person a huge sheet of written paper, of written information, is probably not going to help them out that much. Is verbal communication even helpful? A person might prefer to have all of that written in black and white, and then there's the ability to understand absolutely what is in front of you. It might be that the person doesn't want to be in the same room as you and might want to sit on the outside and talk to you or ask you questions. Or even, online messaging or, writing down something and passing it under the door, potentially. Nurses are very, very good at glossing over information and being quite indirect, assuming that you've got the gist of what they've said without going into detail. Often there is a pressure of time, which means nurses might not feel as though they have the ability to go fully in depth, which is exclusionary. Needing to know that detail is really important, actually helps you understand the situation. Perhaps if you're being subject to a section of the Mental Health Act, you would need to know really clearly what is happening with you. And if you're being given written information about that, it's not helpful. Not always helpful. Some autistic people take longer in answering questions, taking pauses, considering the answers more deeply, not wanting to give a generalised or inaccurate answer, and finding the correct words. It's not always possible to do so in a moment with a new person, say, a new nurse or even someone else asking you a question, to have that immediacy, which is, again, often expected. So just giving, if you're aware that a person might be taking longer, it's, probably not because they're blanking you. It's actually, no, I just need time to think. Just give me a break. Give me a minute to reply. Discuss that, the feeling, alexithymia, and about eye contact as well. Something that's very often conflated with poor mental health is this person isn't making eye contact with me. Okay, from an autistic perspective, we talk an awful lot about eye contact. Is it painful? Is the sensation of me looking at you, does it hurt you? Can you feel that elsewhere on your body? Does it cause you discomfort? Is it distracting for you to look at me in the eyes while I give you information? Do you find it easier to look away in order to compose your response? That person not looking at you is not necessarily a sign that they're anxious. It might be their baseline. So don't jump to the conclusion that that person is, struggling. It might be that actually they're quite happy. They're more than happy doing that. Next slide, please. As well, we talk a lot about change from a diagnostic standpoint and just generally in the autistic world and how stressful, dysregulating change can be. If you're suddenly thrust into a new environment, as said, that's a drastic change at the best of times. Even if you have the ability to, in advance that you're going to come into this new environment, you're still grappling with a lot of unfamiliarity. In terms of the people that you're talking to, in terms of the sensory, all of the experiences are affected by this. So it's usually helpful if there is a very clearly outlined routine, functioning of the ward, what to expect, who you're going to meet, who to talk to, who to ask questions of. Do you have a key nurse, for example? Do you know who your care coordinator is? Do you know what any of these words mean? So I think from the get-go, it needs to be made really clear in that person's preferred manner of communication what the expectations are, what you can do, how people can help. Again, unfortunately, time pressure is a real thing for nurses and other healthcare staff. So setting an expectation might be done in a very off-the-cuff manner. And I think a lot of neurotypical people underestimate how damaging that can be. If you say, oh, this person I'm sure will be here later, kind of making an assumption. Your doctor will be here at 2. Your doctor will usually here about 2 o'clock. He emailed yesterday to say he'll be here. That might be like literally a 5-second conversation. But then that's an expectation. And if that's set, it's so coming up to that time, okay, it's nearly 2 o'clock. Is my doctor here? No. Is he here now? No. 15 minutes later, is he here yet? Still no, stop asking. And then that person's sidelined but left feeling dysregulated, feeling uncomfortable and anxious because something that has been set has not happened. Things being last minute as well. Many times I've seen people moved kind of spur of the moment because there's a new patient coming onto the ward. The room that other person is in needs to be made free. So that means they need to pack up all of their stuff, take it into the communal area, sit with it for a bit while this new person goes in, and then move into the different room while it's cleaned. Imagine just upheaving your life. Like, you're in this space. You just have to up it. It's dreadful. So that happens very often. So it's what can we do to limit that? Absolutely giving notice is really important, but it's sticking to the expectation. As well about decision making, having the ability to take in the information, weigh it, have the time to consider it, and effectively act on that. Can the staff, can the people supporting you also act on it? Next one, please. So the general trend and kind of thing that's been spoken most about by professionals is a lack of training. professionals don't really know these things. They don't really know what to do, how to help. And only around 30, sorry, I think that was 2016 or 2019 was that top study. Only about 30% of healthcare professionals had actually received autism-specific training. So staff members who do not feel well equipped, who are pressured continually by responsibilities and time and other people, wanting to meet other people's needs, get burnt out. That's just a fact. And if a person is unable to maintain their enjoyment of the job, their love, can they provide consistency for a patient? More recent study points to significant gaps in understanding in British healthcare professionals. So while they might have, the study looked into attitudes and the effectiveness of autism awareness training, which found that while the attitudes were good, the knowledge and experience is not necessarily there. Again, looking for more actionable sort of, more actionable training. There was an experience I had as a nurse, student nurse. Anecdotally, I didn't have any sessions specific to autism or neurodevelopmental conditions in my nurse training, and that was fairly recent. The one that made the most difference to me, kind of my experience, I think, looking back on it, was a talk I had about dementia. And this was a person who came in to deliver the training. Found it very informative, very interesting. She was very engaging. And at the end of the training, she disclosed that she also has Alzheimer's. For me, that was very important, because I was like, okay, well, this is no longer just a professional talking to another professional, in theory about a condition. Instead, this is a person telling me their personal experiences in a really interesting way, kind of subverted the expectations totally. But for a very long time, it's been professionals versus the community. And one thing that has been happening increasingly in modern times is the neurodivergent community gaining more of a voice for itself. I think Linda presumably is going to talk a lot about co-production in the next, in the coming talk, but it's absolutely both parties. It should the responsibility for change shouldn't be on the individual. It shouldn't be on that community, but those people who provide care as well and support, which is, of course, healthcare professionals. But it should never be dictatorial. Some of you will likely be familiar with this. Oliver McGowan. He's a young person who died in care under NHS care. I think it was around 2016. Basically, in an entirely avoidable manner, lots of failings took place in his care. And as a result of that, the kind of fallout from that and the impact, there is now specific Oliver McGowan training. So it's basically looking to broaden people's understanding of what they can do differently of autism and how they can help. There is ongoing research into its impact, or at least it's about to be underway. I saw funding approval for one. I think it was November last year. So kind of long-term study looking into how effective it actually is, what further changes might need to be made. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I had to come up with a quality improvement at the end of the of this assignment that I did, and I kind of robbed the idea from this, basically. So this is something that's available on the National Autistic Society website. It's called My Health Passport. It's just a template document for you to fill in your own information. Who to contact, how best to support, what might be more challenging. What might be challenging, what's very helpful. It's something that the individual has to fill out and bring with them. Remember to distribute to healthcare providers. And the intent of it is to help those healthcare professionals have an understanding of that person as an individual. What can be done best to support, basically. What to avoid doing to make things, to not make things worse. The downside to this is, of course, the responsibility is on that person to create that document, bring it with them, and hand it out, repeatedly to different people, which, as you might imagine, would be fairly tiring, to say the least. And additionally, if you give that document to someone, can you guarantee that the professional who you're handing it to has the necessary understanding and expertise to act on that information? Is it even helpful to them? Do they have the time? Do they have other staff members who they can coordinate with to help? So it's never just one intervention. It's never just, the training. It's quite honestly just systemic changes. So like the whole assignment originally was asking for one quality improvement that you could make, and actually it's never just one thing. It's literally the whole. Yeah. So as you might imagine, it's quite frustrating. So this has been adopted. I think I saw a Leeds-based NHS trust recommending that people use this. Again, I think the ideal would be for all services to have something specific that they create with the individual, as opposed to them having to bring it themselves and have the time and advanced knowledge to know that they're going into hospital to even give it to someone. Because what if you find yourself very suddenly in services and you have no say? Next slide, please. So, really to conclude, staff want and definitely benefit from the additional training. I think it's something that service users, autistic individuals, continue to ask for, but I think by the constraints of funding, political will, etc., has not really been enacted at the scale that we would hope. It's useful to bear in mind these considerations, even if the people you're caring for are not diagnosed as autistic, because the chances are, if they are in services, they have a higher chance of being autistic, by virtue of the fact that they're experiencing a mental health difficulty. So applying these changes broadly is helppful anyway. It's always best to be more considerate. It's always best to be more person-centred. So being aware of it is not aware, but bearing it in mind, I think, is really important. For example, thinking about change in routine, we always recommend that routine is good for people when they're experiencing mental health difficulties anyway, like just having that set routine, stabilising, regulatory, etc. But even more so is that important for autistic people. So you can just have that thing in your head and apply it, and actually that will have a broader use and benefit, hopefully. Same with speaking directly, it doesn't hurt just to be very, very clear and give people set expectations and a firm understanding of what's happening. And lastly, the pressure should not be placed on the individual. It should be a group effort. It should, I think power needs to be taken out of the hand of professionals, and ideally, collaborated on, co-produced. So I think that's pretty much everything. Thank you.
The passport's actually available now. What do we have to do to get one?
I think I'm sure there's a link. I probably should have included it on the actual thing. But if you type in on Google NAS or National Autistic Society My Health Passport, you can get the template on there and download it and do with it what you will.
Joe Dring, can we make sure there is a link to the NAS Health Passport? It might not suit everybody, but it's at least a start, and it can put things in like your reaction to certain medications, which is one of the major things that Oliver McGowan's experience showed us, that despite the parents saying quite clearly, please do not give him this medication, that they were ignored. However, and that that mother is still campaigning, one of her major campaigns at the moment, which went to a discussion at Parliament, a debate, was to ensure that people in education get training on autism, which at the moment is not, it's hit and miss. So she still carries on campaigning. It's still quite distressing to see this woman's distress and how she is using that distress to try and make changes for other people. So a very brave woman. Okay, so the health passport I think is really important. As you said, Ren, issues around pain, issues around medication. So some people, some of you in the room, because I've had the privilege of knowing some of you, both in work and other contexts, that some of you can take a medication and it doesn't even touch the sides. Others of you, you take a medication and it knocks you out. Anaesthetic, that some people, the anaesthetists are going, I cannot believe that you haven't gone under yet. So there's sort of things like that. Now, if you don't know that, it doesn't mean you can't put something in the health passport. It might mean you could put, so Ebony, we had somebody yesterday, didn't we, where we suspected they might probably need a huge amount of anaesthetic, but they hadn't ever been in that experience. So in the health passport that we were talking with the family about drawing up is maybe they could put in that, we don't know whether anaesthetic might be needed to be given in a huge amount or a small amount. So have a look at it. If you want to draw up your own health passports as well, as you said, Ren, that is a responsibility on the individual, but perhaps you could get other people to help you think about that. Yeah. There's also the distinction between your experience of pain and your communication of pain. So back in the day, when they were building hospitals for people with a learning disability, they didn't put any glass in the windows because they said that those people don't feel temperature in the same way. It's one of the person Ebony and I worked with yesterday, where they'd broken their, was it their toe or their ankle? Yeah, broken their toe, and the family didn't know about it until when he was asleep, he whimpered. So when he was awake, there wasn't any communication of pain. So we were exploring, is it that he wasn't experiencing pain, or he didn't know how to communicate it, or he didn't think it would be of any interest to anybody that he was in pain. So these things are incredibly complicated. But I suppose at least if we start with a health passport, Ren, that's a really good start.
Yeah. I mean, just on that as well, I mean, whether or not the pain that you're experiencing is at a threshold, like whether the pain you're experiencing is at a threshold to let someone else know about it. Like, is it really bothersome? Can I just kind of keep it under wraps or not? You know, is it important? It's difficult to say. Sorry.
You know, this microphone, as you can tell, isn't amplifying our voices. What it is doing is recording. So don't think that we're talking into a microphone for absolutely no reason whatsoever. I think the other thing that we know, a lot of people don't want to draw attention to themselves. So if you have to say I'm in pain, that means then people are going to come and talk to you and do something about that. They might even touch you, or they might take you to a hospital or something. So again, it's complicated. One of the reasons that I'm going to introduce the next document to you is not because it's the most exciting document I've ever read, but because I think it's important that you are given information that if things like that happen, you can try and use documents to try and negate. So clearly that sister didn't know what she was doing, and that is outrageous and a violation of your human rights, let alone about being autistic. Unfortunately. So I think the predominant model in healthcare is what I call the expert model, which is that people like me are the experts and that people on the receiving end of my services are not the experts. Now at Axia, we totally turn that on its head and use what we call a partnership model, which is we believe that the people in this room are the experts on themselves, the experts on their families, and the task of people like me is to deliver my expertise, which clearly I've got, but to deliver that in relationships of mutual respect and trust. Sadly, that is not the predominant healthcare model. And if you look at doctors' training, when doctors, I don't know about, you might want to say something about nurse training following on, Ren, to give you a bit of a structure there, is that in doctors training at the beginning, when I was training junior doctors, they were quite open to the idea that people were the experts on themselves and that they needed to believe that. But as they went further and further through their training and got closer to becoming a consultant, it actually went the other way, because the consultants are seen as being right up there. And, you know, it takes quite a lot of guts as a professional, to be honest with you, to say, I don't know. And you don't often hit, and because I think sometimes when we go to healthcare professionals, some of us might have such a high expectation of what their knowledge and skills are that we almost want them to give us the answer. So if they turned around and said to us, I don't know, we might find that quite disconcerting. I think if you can say, I don't know, but this is what we're going to do to try and find out, but that's quite scary. You have to be pretty confident in your skills as a professionals to say that. Ren, did you want to say anything about nurse training and what's the predominant model in that?
Sure. So first of all, just on the point about pain and your experience with the sister who wiped the anaesthetic off the board, I think obviously that points to a real lack of understanding, a lack of a lack of understanding. Probably actually having interacted with a person and asked them about their experience of pain. Maybe they just kind of said, "Oh, well, this is just true of everyone then." And certainly it's interesting that you mentioned it was a sister, because I think seniority in nursing and in any healthcare profession, like it's meant to be that the younger people come in and then their training filters upwards and everyone's hunky-dory, but very rarely that happens, because you have people who are set in their ways, people who don't necessarily want to learn or change. And of course, if there's a negative perception of some kind of label, be it physical or mental health condition or neurodevelopmental condition, it's very difficult to change that. The thing in nursing. So I agree. Nurses, certainly management as well. Maybe it's not my place just to kind of bitch about everyone, but I'm keeping that inside. There is definitely that, like, we have the answers. You are the one being unconstructive and difficult and, you know, obtuse. You should just conform to the expectation, and you should just keep pace with us, which obviously does not work.
I suppose one thing, if you're offered a trainee, I know sometimes we go, ooh, do I want a trainee? But actually I'm thinking about my profession now of clinical psychology. The trainee clinical psychologists, because they're learning, have probably got the most up-to-date knowledge base. They might not have all the experience, but they've got the up-to-date knowledge base. So it might be, if you're offered a trainee and you think, oh, I'm not sure about that, you might be better off with a trainee rather than somebody who's been doing it for a long, long time, who's maybe sort of not as up-to-date as they should be. So the whole move from Asperger's to autism is a presentation in itself. There is a book coming out in a few months' time that we're hoping to get the author to come and do a presentation here about that. And in there's quite a lot about the move from Asperger's to autism spectrum disorder. So we haven't got time to go into that today, but if people wanted us to, if I get through this next bit really quickly, I can talk you through that if anyone's at all interested. For those of you that are new to the group, this group is, you know, as many times as you want to come. You don't have to come every time at all. You can come once, never again. You can come every time. The presentations are recorded. So if any of you say anything and you don't want it on the recording, that's fine. Dream edits it out. So feel free to say whatever you like, but it won't be recorded if you don't want it to. So you can just come and as many times as you like. The idea that when we co-produced the group back in the day, I think 2015, the group co-produced it, said what they wanted was to be given information, as well as meeting other autistic people, which is great that there are loads of autistic people in the room, it's brilliant, but also to give you information that might either improve enhance your own understanding of autism or the care that you receive or on behalf of other people. And that's the aim of my next presentation, that it's about how to give you the information. Okay, well, let's make a start, because I realise I left everyone hanging with the Asperger's autism thing, and I think some people want to know a bit more about it. Okay, so thank you very much, Ren, for doing that. So Ren did the first presentation quite a long while ago, updated it to see how things have changed. This document that is yours to take away is, right, there's the cynical bit of me. This document was released just before Christmas. And because of my over 40 years of working in the NHS, I know when documents are released just before Christmas, it's so they sync. And I've emailed a few, yeah, they disappear. It was something like the 22nd of December. And there's not many of us that are looking. I mean, I love these sort of documents, so I found it. But okay, so this is the latest document. I think some of you haven't got a copy. If we're going to put a link on the website, could I ask any employee of Axia who's got a copy, could they pass it? I think it's people at the back that haven't necessarily got a copy. So can we, but there will be a link on the website. Okay, we ready? So this is the latest document that, as I say, came out in December. It's meeting the needs of autistic adults in mental health services. So it follows on really well from Ren's presentation. And the guidance is for what are called integrated care boards. They, up until relatively recently, were called, I've gone and forgotten, care commissioning groups. Is that right? Clinical, that's it. It just...
I was going to say, you always just call CCG.
CCGs, that's why I've forgotten what it stood for. Clinical commissioning groups. Next week it will be called something else. But at the moment,
Very different if we played Jackbox.
it's called integrated care boards. So some of you are here from Salford. Yep. So your integrated care board is Greater Manchester, Salford locality. Some of you are here from Chester, Cheshire, Liverpool, East Cheshire. Your integrated care board is Cheshire and Merseyside. And then there'll be a subcategory, locality, Liverpool, whatever. Anyone here from anywhere else then? Okay, you don't want to say, don't worry. So integrated care boards are the top of the health provider chain. So this is as high as it goes. And then health organisations, and then what are called wider system partners. So that's like, I think that just means anybody else, really. Okay. So you've got a copy of it. I'm not going to take you through the whole document, or we'll be here all week. Let me tell you with the next slide, as Ren said, this document also goes on to say that autistic adults represent a significant and fast-growing number of patients supported by adult mental health services in England. I don't know whether that's good or not good, but that's what they're saying. Okay, next slide, please. Now, this is an interesting figure. Between March 2017 and August 2023, there has been a 51.3% increase in the number of autistic inpatients. So that's people who've been admitted into a ward without a learning disability. Is that good? Not good? I don't know.
I think that people haven't got their needs being met.
Okay, so people have ended up in inpatients. So the negative side is people have been admitted into wards. Can I ask you to think of a positive side? Because yes, I think there's a positive to this. I think there are more people who've been diagnosed. So they might have already always been there, but they've been diagnosed. So I don't know which it is, and we won't know. So in a way, that's a shocking figure, or it could be a really good figure. But I don't know, but that's the figure.
Just the thought that it could be a good figure in terms of there are actually beds for people to go in.
Yeah.
go to.
Okay, so if you need it, if you need that, what might even, if it's a good place, it's a sanctuary for somebody who's in a really seriously risky place. So it could be good. Yeah. So this figure could be good or not good. So it's always important when you see figures like this to not necessarily jump to one conclusion. Try and see this is patronising of me, but try and see the potential of what else could this mean. There'll be people in the room that are much better with statistics and figures than I am, and will be able to see through some of this dream.
I'm just wondering, see, you haven't got a basis for comparison there.
No.
If you knew between 2017 and 2023 the total number of increased patients that they saw,
Yeah.
if that was like 20%, and then it was 51% of those were autistic,
Yeah.
then that would imply different meaning, because you could say, well, it's because they've been seen and recognised.
Yeah.
But if it's 51.3% increase and it's 51.3% increase in autistic people, then that's pretty much just autistic people. So I think you do need to be able to compare.
Yes, okay, that might be in the document. So if some of you want to, Ebony. Okay, next slide. Right, I'll take you through this because there'll be some people in the room who are not able to read for all sorts of reasons. So there are 10 principles in this document. So the first one is services have to be accessible and acceptable. So pretty profound statements. People who've been admitted, for particular, need to have meaningful activity. That the next one, I think Ebony follows on from what you're saying, that where the mental health professionals think it might be autism, that people need to be assessed quickly. Then that evidence needs to guide the intervention. There's something about managing risk. There's something about minimising the use of restrictive practices. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Supporting cohesive transitions, so moving from one place to another. Then what I think is interesting is, for the first time in the document, looking at the physical health needs of people who are autistic, who are accessing mental health services. So actually recognising that there's a lot of co-occurring conditions like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. So a lot of the physical health conditions that we're now recognising are maybe coming about maybe through the stress that people who are autistic are experiencing, or with gastroenterology issues that maybe there is a strong link with autism. So then these integrated care boards have been told they have to develop a commissioning strategy, and they have to be informed by local and national statistical data, and they have to have a well-trained workforce. Now, I know because I sent this document to a couple of people who I thought would definitely have seen it, that they hadn't seen it. So I don't know whether, for example, your integrated care board has actually seen this document and is implementing it. They should have, but it might be you're one of the first to point it out. Okay, the next one, please. Then they talk about different levels of stepped mental health care. So the first level is staying well in the community. I'm not sure I particularly like that term, but I think when they're saying well, they mean both emotional and physical well-being. So that's being at home, going about your daily life. Then the next step is you're experiencing some sort of mental healthcare issue, and it's all being planned, it's all being done very methodically and carefully. The next one is crisis care, where there's an immediate crisis that needs to be responded to, but that might still mean you're staying at home. It might be that the home treatment team, or whatever it's called in your area, comes to see you. And then the final level is being admitted, that I think Ren was focusing quite a lot on when you're admitted, what is the environment like. Okay, so that's the stepped mental health care programme. Next slide, please. Right, here we go. It's another load of... So the idea is people should have better experiences, that the services should be better in the community. There's been numbers 3 and 4 are driven by lots of things that have been in the news recently, where we've seen tragedies of autistic people who have been moved many, many miles from their families and have died. And so the document has loads of sections on abuse, neglect and maltreatment. It also talks about restrictive practices, including physical and pharmacological restraint. So basically that people are being restrained physically and also being given drugs to actually restrain them, not being given drugs to help them, but to restrain them so they can't actually move very much. The use of seclusion and long-term segregation. So the tragedy is all of those things have been highlighted in recent examples of autistic people. The whole thing about restraint, people now are saying, there's all sorts of papers coming out now saying maybe we shouldn't have been doing physical restraint, that maybe staff aren't very good at it. Some of us were saying that 30 years ago. Then it's talking about effectiveness of interventions, and then it talks about, people shouldn't keep coming in to these services. Next slide, please, Jo. Right, post-diagnostic support is recognised as an important element of supporting autistic adults to stay well in the community. However, it is out of the scope of this guidance. But this is in another document. Right, this is the document. I'm really not going to bore you with this. This is the document in which post-diagnostic support is mentioned. So although it's recognised as an important element, it isn't in that document. It's in this document. If anyone wants a copy of this document, I haven't got my glasses on. Jo, can you read out what this document's called, please?
A national framework to deliver improved outcomes in all age autism assessment pathways, guidance for integrated care boards.
Okay. Anyone want a copy? Let us know. Makes dramatically interesting reading. Okay, so I've shown you the copy. Can we put a link? No, I don't need it. Can we put a link, Jo, on that one, please, as well? So seriously, this is what... Luckily, the people who are in this room have got a diagnostic pathway to us at Axia. So it's not as... but you might know other people that haven't got access to a diagnostic pathway, and you could inform them about their right to access Axia under right to choose if it's for an adult autism diagnosis. Okay, next slide. As you said, Ren, I'm going to mention co-production. The good thing about this document is it was co-produced with autistic individuals and autistic professionals and non-autistic professionals. It's actually a very well-written document. It also refers to things that we've known about for a long time. It talks about, for example, the physical health needs that I've referred to, which is great. So saying, autism is more than just a sort of cognitive. There may be other aspects of being autistic that are important, things like pain that we've spoken about. It also talks about masking. So it's saying just because somebody might present in a certain way, they might be hiding from you for all sorts of reasons. They might be camouflaging, they might be masking. It also talks about sensory sensitivities in quite a lot of depth, which I see is excellent, because followed on from what you were saying, Ren, about how important that is. And it also talks about executive functioning, planning and organisation, and things like routine, structure, predictability. So it actually talks about the real key elements of autism. So it's a good document. And I think that's probably, yeah. So the reason of sharing this with you, what we try and do at this group is whenever a document comes out or some guidance, like nice guidance might change, that we try and share that with the group so that you're armed with the latest information. So if any of you are experiencing any contact with mental health services, albeit in your community or being admitted, and that's any mental health service, this is the document that you can use to say, you should be doing this. I'm not saying that's then going to go, oh yeah, all right then, we will. But you've got a document then. There's also, all of you in your trusts and areas will have what's called the Patient Advisory Liaison Service, which are a very good service when they work well, of providing a link between patients, let's call people patients for this reason, and the services. And of course you can make a complaint. I suggest it's better to try and work through the Patient Advisory Liaison Service first before you make a complaint, because you might be able to resolve it in an amicable way that doesn't cause you stress. Because the minute you go down the complaints procedure, it's stressful. Not saying you don't do it, but you could try those first. So that's the Patients Advisory Liaison Service. It's always abbreviated to PALS. Let's end on an upbeat note. It's wonderful to see so many people in the room. I hope you've got something out of it. We'll probably edit out all of the Asperger. I just think it's too difficult for Dream to do that. So if you don't mind, we'll edit all that out. It's not, everything I said to you, I fervently believe is the truth. But it's too complicated. Those of you that are on X or Twitter will know
Please
that...
don't call it X. I despise it named.
It's still Twitter, isn't it?
It's still, yeah, you know that the minute you say certain things, you get a
I
backlash.
actually haven't updated my phone for that app on my phone for ages, so it still has the Twitter logo and name on it.
Has it? Good.
I refuse to update it as long as possible, though I think I've run out of time because I can't see quote tweets anymore.
I honestly don't know how mine changed while we were still in Germany. I didn't even update it or anything. It just randomly changed.
So the next group is, Evie? The 6th of March. I hope to see all of you again at some point. You're under no obligation. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.